Okay, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Randy Vanderhoof, and currently I have two roles. I'm the Executive Director of the FIDO Technology Alliance, which is an industry association that includes stakeholder organizations in the payments and identity and access security markets, who collaborate together in an open forum to advance the awareness and accelerate the adoption of security technologies to make payments and digital transactions more secure. My other role is as the director of the U.S. Payments Forum, which is our separate but affiliated industry association that represents the U.S. payments industry and addresses issues related to the implementation of EMV and other new payment security technologies. So I'm joined today by a panel of industry experts representing international payment standards and specifications organizations. And they are Christina Aabye, who's a member of the board of managers for EMVCo. We have Christina Hulka, who many of you may know, is the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer for FIDO Alliance. And Dinesh, Katyal, who is Director of Product at Financial Data Exchange. So in a few minutes, I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their organizations and their areas of responsibility. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you a little bit more about the topic that we're going to be discussing on this panel today and the issues that we hope our panel will be addressing today. So as you know, the topic today is standards can enable frictionless, secure, and private payments experiences. As e-commerce grows as a percentage of total retail sales, so does fraud, and retailers are looking into ways to adapt. So with the Fraud Attack Index reporting that 1.5 million consumers whose accounts had already been compromised had additional accounts opened in their name, retailers need to consider identity verification and authentication as part of their payment strategy. How can we fight against account takeovers and the use of synthetic identities? And how can we keep cardholder information secure? Advanced standards in the global payments industry are providing the tools needed for issuers, merchants, and processors to keep fraud in check and to provide consumers with a safe, frictionless checkout experience. With the uncertainty of who the real customer and merchant is in an e-commerce space, it's important that payments industry be aware of the standards, the payments technologies, as well as the best practices that have emerged to address these identification and authentication challenges. And this panel session will cover how emerging standards and technologies can work together to enable security and convenience in the payment space. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and in a few words, tell us about their organization and their current roles in that organization and any other background information you'd like to share about how your organizations and standards you represent are making the payment space more secure. Why don't we begin with Dinesh, if it's okay?
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of the panel. I'm a director of product with Financial Data Exchange. Financial Data Exchange is a consortium of leading financial institutions in the United States and Canada. Most of the large fintechs in these countries, as well as many of them globally. We are about 155 members strong. These companies have gotten together to promote secure interoperability in financial data sharing for the purposes of benefiting the end user, the consumer, the small business, by providing them with a secure means of sharing the data with the applications that they like to use in the day-to-day. For example, I might want to use my data with mint.com or with Quicken to manage my finances. In my role as the director of product, I oversee all of our working groups and the development and roadmap of our specifications, which include user experience guidelines for financial data sharing, how the consent is granted, what does good consent look like, how is the user authenticated and authorized, the API and data structures that are used to communicate the data from the data holders, the banks, and the financial institutions to data recipients, the personal finance management applications, the lending applications that actually need to use this data to deliver products and services. I also oversee other working groups, such as security working group that provides design patterns and controls for security and authentication and authorization, and the certification working group that's looking to establish a standard of conformance around these standards. I am also responsible for engineering of some of the products that we are about to launch. We will be launching a certification program, which would test for conformance against the standards. We will have a directory of certified participants, and we will be standing up a reference implementation that would be the gold standard of how our standard should be implemented. Before that, I've had a long career in payments, starting with Verifone, building point-of-sale solutions, acquiring solutions, issuing solutions for payments, moving on to Intuit, where I launched a payments developer program for Intuit Payments with a reach into over 30,000 ISVs in the QuickBooks ecosystem. I also have launched remote deposit check products, ACH payments. Moving on to eBay, I manage their buyer risk programs, reducing broken payments due to the buyer's misuse of the payment methodologies that the eBay promoted, as well as moving on to then to TradeShift, where I worked on supply chain payments and enterprise payments. So that's just a quick tour of my background and of Financial Data Exchange. Over to you.
Thank you, Dinesh. And Christian, would you like to go next, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy. Thank you for inviting me. As you said, I am, or as Randy said, I'm one of EMVCo's board of managers. Besides board of managers, I've been involved in probably 17 years in EMVCo, doing all from security, contactless, 3D secure remote commerce. My day or night job, if you want, is at Visa, where I am a senior director and responsible for a lot of the chip specifications that Visa produces and publish, and two, is responsible for a lot of our activity in EMVCo, that hence my deep involvement in EMVCo. I have been with Visa for around, actually on Sunday, I've been there for 19 years. Before then, I was in various financial institutions as software engineer, etc. I think that suffices. EMVCo suffices for me. In terms of EMVCo, well, EMVCo are the entity that manage the EMV specifications, and we also support testing programs, if applicable, to help seamless and global interoperable and secure payment transactions. Most people know us as EMV, which kind of seems to indicate chip specification, contact or contactless, EMV liability shift, and whatever people call it. We clearly have now gone beyond chip and working now in particular the e-commerce space, which is where most of the action are happening right now. Clearly, COVID-19 have a push to both contactless in the card present space and move a lot of traffic from people being in stores to the online world. So very kind of interesting that we at the same time have a lot of activity in the e-commerce space. EMVCo specifications, the EMV specification enables participants in the ecosystem to have confidence that the products that they issue, both on the seller side and on the buyer side, can work in a global secure acceptance infrastructure, and regardless of where in the world or how the consumer make a payment. We do have a lot of activity with other stakeholders. We have our associate program where we have a lot of input to how EMVCo specifications shall evolve and what they should contain, as well as technical review, etc. And then we also connect with other relevant industry bodies, PCI, Global Platform, NFC, etc. I think that was it for EMVCo and for me.
Thank you, Christian.
Sure.
And Christina, and from our host organization, FIDO Alliance, could you go next, please?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Randy. So I'm hoping, since we're 4 days into this conference now, that everybody has an idea of who FIDO is. But in case you missed it, we're working to reduce the world's reliance on password and replace it with something that is simple to use and more secure. So that's FIDO. As for me, I'm the co-executive director and chief operating officer, which means I spend my time managing the day-to-day operations of FIDO, as well as overseeing the program management team. And that involves working with the working groups, making sure that we continue to progress the work items, whether it be in the technical standards arena or talking about deployments, and creating advice and guidance to put out there so that people understand what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And right now it's a really exciting time for FIDO. We are full on into the deployment of FIDO 2. And there's a lot of activity going around within the organization talking about how to deploy, user experience, what relying parties need to really get this rolled out and for it to be ubiquitous. And so it's an exciting time for FIDO right now. As for my background, I've been with FIDO for 4 years. Prior to that, I spent 18 years with a well-known payment system, and I know Christian very well. And I also represented Visa on the board of EMVCo for a number of years, and I'm very keen to see how our collaboration is evolving and making sure that we really solve for that online security and usability issue. That's it from me and Randy.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you all for being here today. So we're going to get into the specifics of the specifications and the standards that your organizations represent and support the security of payments in various areas here. But before we do that, I thought it would be helpful if we framed this discussion around really what are the issues that consumers and banks and merchants are dealing with right now in trying to be able to support and expand online communications and online transactions. So if I could ask each of you to kind of frame for us what you see as the primary issues are in the payment space today, and then shortly after that, we'll get into talking about some of the solutions that your organizations represent. So Christian, I'll let you go first this time and talk about EMVCo, well, representing EMVCo, but speak more in terms of the use cases for consumer and financial institutions in managing payments in these rather challenging times.
Right. As you said, fraud is growing in the e-commerce space with EMV, the last country in the change from Magstripe to EMV being US. We see a lot of fraud moving to the card not present space. In the card present space, we have been successful with the EMV specification to have kind of a uniform way to present your card and get it transacted. The same uniformity doesn't exist in the card not present space. For instance, the way to get hold of a PAN, well, either it's you have to fat finger your 16-digit or however many digits it is into the keyboard, or you have to store it somewhere locally on your computer. That clearly introduces risk in that these data can be captured or hacked or whatever. The way you do it is have a variety of different ways. There's no common way of doing it. So there's a myriad of different implementation, which means consumers get confused and actually also increases the risk for doing something wrong, and your primary account number can end up in the wrong hands. So hackers can, via malware, etc., can get hold of data. Consumers are confused. There's a myriad of different ways to do that, and that's what we're trying in EMVCo to see if we can standardize at least some of those components. Also, let me add to that, in the card present space, we have what we call CVM, cardholder verification methods, which means that not only do you know you have a genuine card, you also know that you're the genuine consumer. Very difficult, or more difficult to do in the card not present space. So we are clearly working in that area, in particular around FIDO Secure, to see if, and together with FIDO, see if we can solve that issue, that we don't have a good cardholder authentication in the card not present space, which means that we will have more fraud there. So we're trying to standardize that, and I think that is or have common specifications around how we can bring the storage of primary account numbers, move that from the edge of the network to central places, as well as get the right cardholder authentication involved. Those are the two biggest issues.
Thank you, Christian.
Sure.
Christina, maybe we can go next. Again, the same question. What are the issues? And also, if you could share on what is different today, perhaps, than maybe people were experiencing a few years back.
Yeah, so to answer the first part of the question first, along the same lines as Christian has mentioned, there's, fraud is a huge one. And in our case, we look a lot at data breaches too, and how much sensitive data is stolen when a data breach occurs. And, we've seen a steady increase over the years of the number of times that happens, and the number of accounts that have been breached and stolen, and sensitive credentials have been reused. So that's a huge one, I think, that consumers, banks, and merchants are all dealing with. The other one that's very front of mind for me is the user experience. We hear a lot when we're having discussions with merchants around cart abandonment, having to exit the merchant screen to go to your transaction and then come back to the merchant to complete your transaction. Just some of the implementations have been somewhat challenging, and while that's certainly evolving, FIDO is very focused on the user experience and how that looks. In terms of what's changed, I'm thinking back. I've been at FIDO for 4 years. I'm thinking back to what the hot issues were as I was coming into the organization versus now. And I think about our relationship also with EMVCo, when we were back then talking about CDCVM and how to use FIDO data to make sure that we could give the issuer assurance that the CDCVM being used on the transaction was valid. And so I think we've moved a lot away from, in the last few years, focusing on the physical world and the active deployment of secure technologies in a physical merchant, to truly focusing on the online environment, and especially bringing COVID into the picture. As Christian mentioned, I think at the very beginning, the focus on contactless transactions and also online commerce, to make sure that they are secure, interoperable, and user-friendly, to enable the economy to continue to thrive. So I think they're probably the key aspects for me. So I guess, Dinesh, you're next.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Dinesh.
Christina. With Randy's permission, I would echo quite a bit of what you both talked about. Fraud definitely is an issue, and I think particularly creating sources of data concentration. When you're talking about online systems, there's a lot of aggregation that's happening now because everything is in the cloud. All of the data is in the cloud, and not only is it in the cloud, and there's a lot of concentration. For example, if I'm shopping at an online store, I'm giving them my password and also my payment instrument, and they're holding it. Guess what? That same data, or an equivalent piece of data, is being stored at multiple different sites. So not only is the data concentrated, it's also concentrated in different places on the web that makes it particularly susceptible to attack. That I think is definitely an issue. From my perspective, some of the other issues that are new are around payments integration. The payments experience on the applications has evolved. So if I'm using Uber or Lyft, the payments are closely tied to the transaction and they happen automatically as a result of the transaction. That level of frictionless experience doesn't exist on the web yet. And that is a bit of a disconnect as I move from my mobile phone to my web experience. And there's a desire for the web experience to match that. That reflects itself in high cart abandonment rates. Christina, you talked about that, and some of the data that I looked at. The cart abandonment rate on the websites, it tends to be as high as 75%. Now, a lot of that is due to factors that have nothing to do with payments, site design, the person's not ready to shop, etc. But a full 22% is related to the fact that you got to create an account on the site. Another, I believe, 12% is related to the fact, or 15% is related to the fact that people are concerned about the payment security online. So clearly we have not done enough to put the consumer mind at ease and to create the level of, the same level of frictionless experiences that exist on integrated apps such as Uber or Lyft. And finally, I think the last bit, I think one of you touched on it, is this whole notion of control, right? On the one hand, I have a deeper relationship with the parties that I transact with, and there's an element of convenience, but there's also proliferation of choices. There are different wallets. If I go on one site, I'll see PayPal, and another site I'll see the Amazon wallet, another site I'll see Visa or MasterPass, and there's just a proliferation of choices, and each choice, if you will, comes with its own user experience, and I have payment instruments stored at each one of these choices, not to mention the payment instruments that I might store at my favorite retailer. And some of them have stored value products like PayPal. And not only do I use money out of my credit card, I can also use money out of my PayPal. So there is this challenge that as a consumer, I'm in a very real danger of losing control over my spending when I go online and start spending at these sites. I have different instruments I'm using at different sites. The data is in different places, leading to lack of control over spending, as well as increased risk of fraud.
Excellent. Thank you, Dinesh, and thank you all for explaining what those issues are. And I think we heard some overlapping, which is good, because we're all focusing around some of the common areas in the market that we're trying to find improvements on. And there are different ways of addressing those issues with different specifications and technologies. And three of you represent three organizations that take different approaches to the security of online transactions. So let me begin with you, Christina, to talk a little bit about the underlying technologies that the FIDO Alliance is promoting, particularly around the introduction of mobile being a center of the e-commerce payments ecosystem in the last few years, and how the authentication mechanisms that are in place are helping to address these concerns in the payment space.
So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that the viewers of this panel session are familiar with FIDO and the various specifications that are out there that we are promoting. But really, we look to address both the web-based online payments infrastructure, as well as the mobile online payments infrastructure. There are a variety of different ways of doing that based on the legacy specifications, and then looking at FIDO2 and how that's being rolled out across browsers and platforms. But I think our main focus is really making sure, so several things. One is the sensitive information doesn't leave the device. Everything stays on device. So where there's a data breach, there's no sensitive data being stolen, your credentials stay safe. The second is the usability. So really having kind of a one-touch solution, whether that be a biometric, whether it be your mobile phone authenticating to another device like your laptop, or the biometric sensor on your mobile phone itself, or a USB key inserted into a laptop, or over Bluetooth on a mobile phone. So our intent is to really make sure that the user experience is seamless, and it's kind of like a one click. So you don't have to enter a password, you don't have to remember your username. You really just, you see on your screen, again, whether it be a mobile phone or a laptop or a desktop or any other device that you're using to perform a transaction, you'll see a notification, touch here or show your fingerprint, and that authentication will take place, the transaction will complete, and you can walk away without worrying about shifting to different interfaces for different aspects of the transaction. So the last one that we're really paying attention to is the regulations around the world, and working with the governments and regulators to ensure that they understand what we are doing and how we're doing it, and making sure that our specifications really do meet the needs of those regulators. And as you may be aware, right now, in many places around the world, there's a lot of discussion around multi-factor authentication, secure cardholder authentication. And so we really care about this. We really care about the consumer privacy. And so we really want to make sure that we walk in lockstep with the regulators around the world. And the last thing is our industry partners. So I've talked a little bit about our engagement with EMVCo, and we're very active with them right now. We'll maybe talk about that in a few minutes. I also see opportunities with Dinesh and working with them to sort of see how we can fit FIDO into their model and help them make their solutions more secure. And then all of our other partnerships that we have with various organizations to really secure the authentication aspect of any transaction. And I also like to add, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the payment space. We are very interested in talking to healthcare providers, travel agencies, all kinds of different industries where secure, interoperable and usable authentication is really useful for that particular environment. So I hope that answers your question, Randy.
Yes, great. Thank you, Christina. And Dinesh, let me ask the same question to you about how the financial data exchange specifications are being applied. And in particular, if you could share with us how that translates into a better consumer experience and more security.
Absolutely. A financial data exchange, as I mentioned earlier, our focus is to promote secure data interoperability. We have a notion of what we call the data provider. These are the primary entities, for example, the banks that might be issuing the credit cards or the payment instruments, such as your checking account on which you can write a check. And then you have data recipients, such as mint.com, or you have applications that help you manage your accounting and help you pay bills. That need access to that data and need access to that service. What Financial Data Exchange does is it provides a uniform language for the data recipients to be able to request data from the data holders and to be able to eventually also be able to issue instructions such as bill payment to the payment instrument providers. Very much along the lines of, if you're familiar with PSD2 and open banking, we had in the US, we had that with OFX, and OFX APIs are also part of the FTX suite of APIs. What's important, I think, to this discussion is this whole concept of the user control. The user control comes in from two parts. One, authenticating the user being proven to be who they are, and then the user then authorizing that action, a payment action from the primary instrument. Some of the things that we work on are consistency of experience across authentication and authorization, so that regardless of the institution that the end user, the consumer, is working with, they have the same experience, which leads to a higher degree of trust and a greater sense of the outcomes that would result from a particular action. FIDO, of course, is a huge part of our authentication stack, and I'll talk more about that later, but that is important. In terms of payments, some of the payments initiatives that we're looking at money movement setup. So if you get a loan and you want the loan payments to be auto-debited from your account, today you type in your bank account or your payment instrument, you could fat finger it, but if you're accessing your information via the API, you authenticate with the one single authentication method that your bank provides, which could be based on FIDO or could be based on the bank's username password with multi-factor authentication. Once you've done that, that's the only thing you need to remember, and the data is auto-provisioned for the money movement setup. Similarly, that same methodology can be used for invoking electronic bills and paying those bills in one seamless operation, which reduces the friction in the payment process while retaining the security and control. So those are some of the things that we're working on. So if I had to sum it up, standardized consent mechanism, standardized means of authentication and authorization for exchanging data as well as issuing the payment instructions.
Thank you, Dinesh. Christian, tell us some more about the EMVCo specifications. And one thing I would just tell the audience is what I've learned from my interactions with the EMVCo organization is they're responsible for the specifications and some of the testing and standardization, but they leave it up to individual markets for how these technologies get implemented. So maybe you can also share some of that flexibility in your response, Christian.
That's a very good point, and allow me just to take 2 seconds here on that. Yes, you're exactly right. We're doing the specification and have the associated test programs around that you can verify that your implementation conforms to the specifications if need be. But EMVCo do not run any systems per se. The specification will end up on the EMVCo website, where they, by a click license, can be downloaded by anyone, royalty-free, and they can be utilized for whatever purpose the licensee wants to do it. The only thing you can't do is start changing it. But otherwise, it's free for anyone to run a program based on those specifications. Clearly, the payment systems, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, etc., are doing that, but that's completely outside of EMVCo. And speaking of payment systems, EMVCo is based, technology are based on what we call card-based payment. It's the 13 to 19 digit number that sits on your credit card, etc. A big user experience in kind of area here is that in whether the transaction actually are getting authorized or not. In the card present space, we knew or know now that going from MaxStripe to EMV chip specification increased the approval rates significantly by the owners of the users of the specification, i.e. the payment systems. And similarly, in the card not present space, the user interface is important in the front end and how you make it seamless, etc. But it's also providing the data that makes the issuer, the cardholder's bank comfortable to actually approve this transaction, and therefore get a good experience from both consumer and merchants. Nobody want to see a declined transaction, and we're trying to get as much data as we can to help the issuer in that decisioning. There's 3 areas where we're actually trying to work on both the actual user interface as well as the approval rates. The first one is the newest kids on the block, which is for EMVCo at least, which is what we call the secure remote commerce. And from a consumer's perspective, as Dinesh was saying, is actually trying to promote simplicity, familiarity, interoperability, convenience, and trust. The consumer knows when they click certain things or do certain things that actually good things happens. In the SRC specification, we're describing that as click to pay. We have defined a logo that can be utilized by merchants by going into EMVCo.com and download the implementation guide as well as the logos, and then you can have a kind of a uniform way to say, if I do this, if I as a consumer click on this, here's what happens. I will get an easy checkout. I will get the transaction, etc. Click to pay icon is not mandatory. It's an option you can use. Some devices don't have visual display, so you can't display it. You have to do other. So from consumer's perspective, it means you know what happens. From a merchant's perspective, it now means that the merchant can then have one integration point because they simply can integrate as per defined by the EMVCo specification. Part of that is similar to what we did from going from magstripe to chip, is exactly to provide dynamic data as part of the transaction. So data is securely being transmitted between the issuer and the merchants using this SRC system. And in chip world, we call it cryptogram. Here, it can be a cryptogram, it can be other dynamic data, which then can feed into the authorization message, will increase the approval rates. The SRC then means, specification then means you actually don't have to enter your PAN. We can recognize that by other information, identity of the consumer, and we know which card number you actually want to use. So from that perspective, much easier to do fat fingering or storing locally your account number. SRC can then be implemented together with the 2 other specifications we want to talk about, 3D Secure, as well as payment tokenization. Let me jump to the 3D Secure. 3D Secure basically makes it possible to do cardholder authentication in a card not present for payment. So the idea is that pre the authorization methods, we have a messaging protocol that enables the merchant to send data to the issuer, and the issuer can say, aha, now I know something about the cardholder, I know something about the purchase, I know something about the merchant, and I can now actually go, and if that all looks good to me, I actually will approve it right there and then. I don't need to have what we call step-up authentication. It just works. In case it looks strange or perhaps even fraudulent, we will do what we call a step-up authentication, which then will provide a challenge to the cardholder. And as we can come back to later, that could, for instance, be a FIDO authenticator that actually has been invoked in that transaction. And if you are the genuine cardholder, you will have access to that one-time passcode or that SMS you get or that FIDO authenticator, and then we can approve it. The previous 3D Secure protocol was only for browser. Now it only works for app-based. And with the newest version, it can also work for gaming consoles and voice devices, etc. We're trying to get rid of the passcode, static password, and user ID, same as FIDO is trying, and get out dynamic cardholder authentication. The final thing I want to talk about is the EMV payment tokenization. Payment tokenization or payment token is a 13-digit number. It looks exactly like a primary account number, but it's not. It's a substitute for the primary account number. If you get hold of that data somehow, then you can't really misuse it in a card not present environment, because we're doing what's called token domain restriction, which means that it can only be used for certain purposes. You don't get hold of the PAN, the real PAN, if you get hold of the token. So this is EMVCo's way to get PANs out of the system. You do not store PANs, you store tokens or references to PANs. And one way to do that is the payment tokenization. I think that those are the three important specifications that we're doing in the e-commerce space, which helps removing fraud and get better consumer experience.
Excellent. Thank you, Christian, and thank you for those explanations. And so we've heard you present the challenges that are out there and the issues you're trying to address. You've each talked about how your organizations and the specifications and standards are working towards implementing them and improving the consumer experience. Now, I want to touch on the final topic, which is how do these technologies work together in this mixed use environment? And so, Christina, maybe I can ask you to try to explain to us in a few minutes just the relationship between what the FIDO specifications are and the financial data exchange, and then perhaps we can have Christian talk about how the EMV specifications work together with the FIDO specifications.
Yeah, so really, I think regardless of who you're talking to, anyone that's looking for secure, simple, interoperable authentication, that's what we offer. We're very laser focused in terms of that authentication piece, whether that is to make a payment, whether that's to access financial services, whether that's to access confidential data. That's really where FIDO is focused. So while we don't have a formal relationship, Dinesh mentioned earlier that FIDO is part of their stack, and I'm very happy to hear that. And you know, it provides them, it meets their needs in terms of the authentication piece that that they need to provide their solutions. As I mentioned previously, we do have a formal relationship with EMVCo, and while I won't step on Christian's toes to talk about that relationship, again, it's really looking specifically at the authentication data that can be used to secure that 3D secure transaction. So
Yeah,
Christian, maybe you can go. Sorry, go ahead, Dinesh.
Yeah, if I may, just to underline what Christina said, the ultimate goal, I think you heard a lot of theme around the fraud and security and the account takeovers. Traditionally, how the financial data has been sourced has been by providing your account credentials to a third party that would then log in to the bank on your behalf to fetch your financial data or to conduct certain operations. We've moved away from that. What FTX promotes is a way for the consumer to directly authenticate with the bank in order to source the data for the need. And FIDO is absolutely a critical part of that. We encourage the data holders to consider certain secure authentication methods as a part of authenticating the consumer. And FIDO is a great means to do that, which reduces the friction overall that benefits the consumer as well as the data recipients, and keeps the credentials out of the system.
Thanks, Dinesh. And Christian, could you share maybe your perspective on either or both of those standards organizations?
Sure. I mean, I'll mostly talk about FIDO because EMVCo and FIDO, as Christina was saying, actually have done quite a lot of work together in getting the right level of user experience as well as the right level of authentication. It goes back to actually 2016, where EMVCo was trying to to embark on a project where we say, well, if you're using on your phone your biometric fingerprint to open the phone, we can use that in a card present transaction to actually says now we have actually captured the cardholder authentication on the phone itself. Don't need to fat fingering with pins on particular these days with COVID. You don't want to touch a terminal. You don't have to sign. We just have the data from the phone itself, clearly in a contactless use case. So we embarked in a arrangement with FIDO, where they would build out kind of way, because they clearly know something about how the offline and the authentication works on the phone. EMVCo don't know that. So we joined forces there. Part of that is now that you can use FIDO Authenticator in a manner that can be utilized in the EMVCo payment system ecosystem, in particular in the card present space. In 18, we enhanced that work to include, in particular, around EMV 3DS messages with FIDO data. The 3D secure EMV 3DS messages have actually always had kind of a placeholder for FIDO authentication since its beginning in 2000. When was that? 16, I believe. But it was not kind of formalized. So we had an official negotiation or arrangement with FIDO to do that. And the idea here is that if you're using your FIDO authenticator, either where the merchant is a relying party or potentially the issuer can be the relying party, we should get information on what that happened. We started with the merchant environment. So if you use your FIDO authenticator to log on to the merchant system, then we could transport that data into the 3DS message, and it will be passed to the issuer. They can say, oh, okay, I see a FIDO authentication happened on that device with that card holder, and I know what's going on. So we have we've done that, and EMVCo and FIDO both have actually published the white paper where we tell how can this authentication data be used in the 3D secure messages. We are continuing that work by trying to find out how can FIDO authentication actually be utilized in a step-up authentication directly. Today it can be done, but it's really on the banks, e-banking, whatever they're doing, it's on their premises, and we're trying to move it directly into the 3D secure specifications. As part of that, we're actually working with both FIDO as well as W3C. We have in 2019 created a web interest group, web payment security interest group between the two systems, where we're trying to find the crossover between EMVCo, FIDO Alliance, and W3C. And there's some very interesting work right now going on and saying, how can we get browsers natively to support a FIDO authentication in a 3D secure step-up transaction? And again, going back, the user interface, how can that be done seamlessly in a way that the consumer knows that this gives trust, or gives the consumer trust to that transaction? So we are very actively working, and I'm sure if it hadn't been for COVID, we would have been to at least 3 meetings where we defined those interactions between the various systems. So yeah, look out for new stuff in that area. So far, we can transport FIDO authentication data in the message, and we're now trying to define how can it be used for step-up authentication.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to leave some time for questions from our audience. So I'm going to end the questioning of our panel here. I want to thank FIDO Alliance for inviting me to participate in this first ever Authenticate virtual conference. And I certainly want to wish and thank Christian Aabye from EMVCo, Christina Hulka from FIDO Alliance, and Dinesh Katyal from Financial Data Exchange for joining me on today's panel. We do have some time for some questions from our participants. And so let's go to those questions now.